more events, you can go to our website, politics-prose.com, to see a calendar of all of our upcoming events in the Children and Teens Department. So today we welcome author Darcie Little Badger, who will be discussing her newest YA novel, A Snake Falls to Earth, with editor Nick Thomas. Darcie Little Badger is a Lipan Apache writer with a PhD in oceanography. Her critically acclaimed debut novel, Alatsoe, was featured in Time magazine as one of the best 100 fantasy books of all time. All time. Kind of a big deal. Alatsoe also won the Locus Award for Best First Novel and is a Nebula, Ignite, and Lodestar finalist. Nick Thomas is a senior editor with Levine Querido. Previously, he was senior editor at Author A. Levine Books, where he started as an editorial assistant. He has also held positions with Bloomsbury, Chicken House, and David Fickling Books before returning to his Author A. Levine Books roots. He edits middle grade and young adult books, and he looks for stories that change something about you by the time you've finished. For today's event, you can ask our guests a question by clicking on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote on your favorite questions by clicking the thumbs up button, and that will push the question up in the queue. You can click on the link in the chat to purchase your own copy of A Snake Falls to Earth and Alatsoe. We do have book plates available while supplies last. You can also find it in our store, so come on in and visit us. Please note that closed captioning is available for today's program. Click the live transcript button that is at the bottom of your screen, and you will select Enable Transcript. All right, I think that covers my, my part. Darcie and Nick, I'm ready to just turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Brandy. You guys have been, Politics and Prose has been a really big supporter of LQ and of Darcie, since we started out a few years ago. So we're really grateful to be here. And I'm super excited to be here. Darcie, you are one of my favorite people to talk to. And this is a chance to celebrate Snake Falls to Earth, which is just, it's such a great book. And it's one that's very special to me. So I've got a whole list of questions, a bunch I don't think I've ever asked you. Ready to rock. So I hope you're ready. The first is really insightful, interesting, unusual question. When did you first start writing this book, and when did you first start thinking about it?
Yeah, so this is a different answer than I'd give for Alatsoe, because Alatsoe was something that I'd been thinking about for really since I was a teenager and in various ways. But A Snake Falls to Earth, actually, I wanted to write another fantasy book after Alatsoe, so shortly after its publication. And I had briefly touched upon animal people in Alatsoe, which are these peoples who they can be animals, but they can also shift into kind of a humanish form, and they're strongly inspired by the animal people in Lipan stories. And I was really intrigued by this concept. So I thought, what is a way where I can write a book that had a bunch of these as fun characters, but also was entwined with the world we live in today, and in fact, in the near future. So I ended up writing A Snake Falls to Earth just over the course of a year. And it definitely evolved from my initial ideas by becoming a story told through two different perspectives. But once I decided I wanted to do that pretty early on, it was, I guess when I enjoy something I'm writing, it's just easy for me to write it. So I was surprised I managed to finish it in a year, but I did.
I never thought about it that way, but so there's that great, for anyone who hasn't read Alatsoe, this isn't really a spoiler, but there's that great scene at the end with Coyote. And I never really thought about that as a nod to, I almost called the book Animal People, because that was the original title, To Snake Falls to Earth. That's so cool. It's almost like you were passing the baton off at that point to the next book.
And I think one thing that I really liked is I got to write about a bat person in Alatsaway just very briefly. And coyotes are fairly common figures, especially because like the coyote is not just a prominent figure in Lipan stories, but also in other native, the stories of other native nations. But there's other animals too. And it was just really cool for me to think, well, what would a bat person like look like in their humanish form and what type of
Yeah.
skills would they have? And then I decided I want to write about a bunch of carnivores. Turns out that I wrote about carnivores, omnivores, and uh, I'm trying to think, did I write about any herbivores? Not as main characters, but they were in there.
Probably the next book. Yeah, here's the cast of characters. Right?
Oh, look at them.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about this hidden art is that we got
The
to
orange
put
really pops, huh, on the computer screen.
yeah. That cover is so gorgeous.
Yeah, shout out to Mia Oki, the artist, and Jade Broomfield, the designer. Yeah, so this is more of a question of like mental headspace, I guess. But like, so like Alatsue was really well received, like just flat out, and was also like a really amazing book, right? Was there any, fear of like sophomore slump or like, oh man, how do I top this? Or what, like what was your headspace kind of going into it? Because
Yeah,
by
I
the time you started
definitely
writing it, you had kind of already gotten some initial feedback and whatnot.
yeah, and it was like I'm gonna say that I didn't like publish Alatsui expecting to get so much like positive feedback, not just from readers, which I think is really the most important, but also from like Time Magazine. So at at that point, I think I was worried because A Snake Falls to Earth is so different from
Yeah.
Alatsui in many ways, that readers would come into it being disappointed that it wasn't like another version of Alatsue.
Yeah.
But hopefully there's enough like shared just I think that the characters were really fun and I
Yeah.
hope that they were in Alatsue too. And so hopefully there's stuff for people who enjoy the Alatsue, but also that it could stand alone as its own book. So I'd say that was my biggest worry. And it is kind of hard because debuts often get a lot of, I mean, it's a new thing, a new writer,
Yeah.
and they do
Yeah.
get a kind of a boost in support just being a debut
Yes.
writer. So then you get your second book and you hope, well, gosh, I hope readers know about this and enjoy it. And I mean, so far I'm very happy with the initial feedback. At least it was published in our November, right? We moved the
Yeah.
publication date to November. So it's been a couple of months and they've been good months.
Yeah. We're very pleased as well. So just FYI.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I want to go to the beginning of the book. One of the best scenes of the whole book is at the beginning, and there's a really powerful scene with Nina and Rosita, right, where she's talking and trying to communicate in Spanish, and then in Lipan as well. And I feel like language is there are a lot of really important themes and kind of through lines throughout this book, and language is really one of them. And that's just like, that feels like a very common scene, right? Like just amongst humanity or amongst, in America, but like it felt super personal and just, you did such a great job with that. Can you just talk about what went into that scene and what it meant to you?
Yeah. And that one was actually very personal in that it was reflective of an experience I had. My mother and I were there with my grandmother, taking care of her in hospice for the last month of her life. And so I have to explain that on my mother's side of my family, so I'm Irish American on my father's side of the family, and they speak English. And on my mother's side of the family, um, thinking back, I think my great generations were the last like fluent Lipon speakers, and from there slowly less of that language was used. So my grandmother, she spoke Spanish. And when I knew her, she spoke both English and Spanish. She was more comfortable with Spanish. But in the hospice, sometimes I'd be alone with her and she wouldn't know how to communicate what she needed in English. So she'd be communicating in Spanish. And it
Mhm.
was really, it felt like I just wanted to be there for her. And yet that barrier was very difficult to overcome. And hopefully I was able to, I did try my best. So that's on the one hand, that's kind of what Nina is feeling, just having this barrier between her and her great great grandmother, where
Yeah.
they want so badly to understand each other. But then you bring in the Lipan language, and as I mentioned, it's like we're currently in the process of trying to revitalize it because there are
Yeah.
a lot of holes since even though phrases and words and stuff have been maintained, fluency, kind of during the mid 1800s to the early 1900s was a period when we were being, let's see, attacked from many different angles.
Yeah.
And that's that's when we really stopped speaking our language fluently.
Yeah.
So there's actually this prayer that my great great grandfather would say in the morning every day, and he'd say it to the sun. And in the first scene of A Snake Falls to Earth, Nina's great great grandmother tells her this story in Lipan, and of course there's not even a translation software on Nina's phone. Like with
Yeah.
Spanish, at least she could translate with her phone, but with Lipan, she couldn't. So she has essentially this mystery, but she knows it's very important to her family, or her great great grandmother wouldn't have told it to her. So this is kind of similar to this prayer my great great grandfather would say, and actually it was passed down through my line to the point like my grandmother knew it. But there were some words that we weren't really able to understand what they exactly meant. We got the gist of it, but because the language, the oral tradition of passing down this prayer or other types of stories
Yeah.
is so strong, we were able very recently to, just based on that, to translate this. So now we have the full prayer that my great great grandfather would say, and just that ability to bring back something so important. I wanted to put in this book, obviously without putting the actual prayer in a fantasy book. So the
Yeah.
story that is introduced in the first scene and is carried throughout as Nina's motivation for a lot of the book
Yeah.
kind of reflects that. So it was, in many different ways, a very personal scene dealing with issues that I've been grappling with for a while.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Something I was going to touch on later was like, you have this like really cool way of like blending, familiarity or just like, or portrayal of like technology, right? Like you're not, you don't feel like an adult, like it's like this is how teens text, you know what I mean? Like there's like Nina with like the storyteller app, or the app that she uses to help with like translating the story. Then you have that, and then you have like obviously this really powerful tradition of oral tradition. You have the dad with like a old bookstore stuffed with paperbacks, right? Which is something kind of in the middle. Like, I almost feel like you're like kind of offering us like a path forward of like how to like, take in some of these new tools or like this new world while still having like respect and honoring and preserving or resuscitating, right, the past, right? Are you conscious of doing that, or does that just kind of like flow out?
I think it might be mostly something unconscious I do, just because like I'm writing, well, I write about fantastic things, but also from a place where I'm familiar. And in my life, of course, I love like technology and new types. Excuse me, I need to drink some water.
Yeah. Da, 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 da. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Got to play some
I'll
elevator
sing
music.
while you drink. Yeah.
Thank you. So like, yeah, I mean, I've done virtual reality type gaming and I'm really quite good at Beat Saber. But on the other hand, I do recognize how very important things that would be considered old fashioned, stuff like that remain. And
Yeah.
that includes the storytelling traditions, just because through that method, we've been able to pass on our history and our culture and our stories for so long, hundreds and years, maybe even longer. And then in A Snake Falls to Earth, Nina actually finds a way to incorporate technology by speaking her stories and recording them for perhaps, future generations of her family who might not be able to hear them directly, or even to her
Yeah.
future self. So it is something where I do think that there should be respect for our past, but also a recognition that peoples and cultures do change over time. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that.
And I feel like you're like offering like, it's like a pathway. It's not, it's obviously you're writing from, a Lipan lens and an indigenous lens, but it's for everyone, right? Because it's like, I feel like, America, it's like this great lie, right? Of like, you just become American, right? And you just like kind of subsume like the past, your past culture or identity or whatever. And that's not the path forward. And just remembering where you came from, right? And like who came before you is incredibly important. Even if you don't speak that language anymore or don't live there anymore. So that's really cool.
Oh, thank you.
All right. You got to answer this like in 3 seconds. Who do you like / enjoy writing better, Nina or Ollie? Just answer.
It's Ollie.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Nina. Ollie was just a lot of fun, and a lot of it was his personality. Because he really is kind of hapless and out of his depth a lot of times, trying to survive, and not just as on his own for the first time, but initially he's trying to survive in this very dangerous world full of monsters and not necessarily nice animal people. And I feel like he's really trying his best, but doesn't always know what to do. And so it's a lot of learning, but also a lot of finding a new family through the friends that he meets. So I thought that was really fun, especially when he met, for example, the friends who will eventually go to Earth with him. They all have different personalities, but he learns to really cherish them. Of course, Nina was fun too, but I did enjoy writing Ollie, especially in the reflecting world, a bit more.
Something I only really thought of while we were, while I was making these questions, I was like, in one sense, like this is a book about just like finding friends, right? It's like Nina and Ollie are like kind of just like on their own, kind of lonely, right, at the beginning, right? But there's a little bit more to the book than just that. Switching up, I think most, if not all, of the characters in the book, identify as LGBTQ plus. Talk about just kind of the way, your choices and how you go about kind of portraying, their experiences in the book. And you can talk about Ellie too, and Alatsoe as well.
Yeah, and I am thinking this kind of goes back to the theme of this book being a large part about friends, and maybe it is because just personally a big portion of my friend group, especially other sci-fi fantasy writers and cosplayers, the people I play Pathfinder with, which it's a tabletop game for those who aren't familiar, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, so a lot of my friends are LGBTQ, and I am, and my spouse is. So I think just naturally, when I was trying to write about friends, that's really just what came to the forefront of my mind first, just the friends that I know. There is one cis heterosexual character, one of the Coyote twins. I do have to say that they do exist in this book, and possibly some of the other secondary characters. But yeah, the vast majority of them are LGBTQ. And in Alatsoe, the main character was asexual. And again, Nina actually is asexual. And I do think it's cool because ace characters, well, really, LGBTQ characters in general just don't have a lot of representation historically. And I think it's getting better now. That it is good to write a book where perhaps readers could see themselves in a fantasy book where they really haven't seen their identity portrayed that often. But general, like readers love reading about all sorts of characters. So, this book's for everyone.
Absolutely. That kind of that dovetails nicely into something I want to talk about too, which was, I think one of the strengths of your writing is that you write fantasy or, you write it kind of in different genres. But they have such resonance, like, and the stories you choose and the characters, they have such resonance in our world, right? And I think Snake Falls to Earth, like one of, if not the biggest one, is I saw two. So the first one I think is climate change, right, and the presence of climate change. And so maybe just talk a little bit about that, and why it was important for you to include, and with this setting in Texas.
Yeah, and that's something that I really drew upon another side of my life, which is the science side. So I do have a geoscience degree and then a PhD in oceanography. And a lot of things I studied were related to climate change. For example, trying to use sea level indicators to predict how local sea level might change in certain places of the world,
Yeah.
or how ocean acidification might affect species of plankton. Um, but also personally, a lot of my family lives in Texas, and a big portion of them live near the Gulf. And already we're seeing some of the effects of our changing climate. And there are predictions for the future, depending on, how the course of emissions and things like that go into the future. There's a range of what we might expect, but one of the things will be, hurricanes might very well be stronger. And that's because the heat of the surface ocean really fuels the strength of these hurricanes. So that's one thing that Nina is dealing with near the Gulf region of Texas, because that's an area where we do have hurricanes. And oftentimes, especially for elderly people in regions where it gets very hot in the summer, that's another concern. If the temperatures, keep going up, what do they do if their air conditioning is broken or if they can't afford it? Or so there's a lot of things that we really need to think about in terms of how to cope with these changes and how to support our communities, especially vulnerable people like our elders. And that's something that Nina is thinking of in terms of her grandmother, who is actually, she is linked to her land in a way where she can't leave it. But, in a certain way, Texas and, well, for the Lipan people, it's northern Mexico, and Texas, that's our homeland. We want to remain there, even if things get more difficult. So it's something that Nina is grappling with, and hopefully, I'm not going to spoil anything, but she and her family really work to protect her grandmother during a hurricane and after it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was the kind of the second theme I think that is so strong, is the importance of homeland, right? And the importance of home. And the way you tie those two together is incredible, right? Incredibly resonant with the real world. Because it's like, to someone who might be, well, just move inland or something, it's like, no, this is like, we've been here, right? Like, we don't want to, we should live in a world where we don't have to, right? Yeah. Did you want to say anything more about, the importance of home and homelands?
Yeah. And that's something that's been, so the Lipan Apache people, we basically, when we were like given the chance to move to a reservation way back when, that was a no for us. There is a small group actually that did, because they were being really negatively affected by smallpox. They had no choice. So there's a small group of Lipan people who live on Mescalero Reservation. But for the vast majority of us, we basically fought. And unfortunately, that means now we don't have a reservation. We're actually state recognized by the state of Texas. So a lot of our recent history is really struggling to hold on to whatever land we can. I remember my grandmother actually, for a long time, she had this large, I forget how many acres, but it was a large amount of land in South Texas. And when she passed away, unfortunately, we couldn't keep it. So that was like a blow. But it is important, like indigenous people, we have this connection to our land. And I think, it's spiriting that so many of us are still in Texas doing our best to remain there. But also slowly things are getting better. Like very recently, Presidio County, the city, there's this Lipan burial ground. Actually, I mentioned it at the end of Alatsaway. I never thought that, it was actually kind of falling apart. Houses had encroached upon it, so a lot of these graves are actually under houses. They're gone. And also for a long time, people would just like steal stones from the graves and ride their bikes over them. But very recently, the city of Presidio actually gave this land to our tribe. So
Yeah.
we had a ceremony where we went there and the rocks were returned because a lot of these people in the city, a lot of them are Lipan, but even people who weren't realized, oh, wait a second, these are important, these are sacred, we should give them back. And
Yeah.
so we're actually undergoing efforts. This land that our tribe now has been given, we're fixing it up. So it's not all hopeless, and I do think we're making really great strides. But it's definitely something that's been challenging for the Lipan. And of course, there's Lipan people in Mexico, and I'm less familiar with what they're doing down there, but it's definitely something that is important to us and that we're going to keep fighting for, just to have this land that, because like it's our homeland, and that we know how to survive there best, and what types of foods can grow there and what we can eat, and just how to exist in this place.
Yeah.
And it's tied to so many of our stories and so many of our families. And I mentioned the burial ground, but of course, there's so many places where our ancestors have been buried here. So it is very important.
That's really, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
That's really cool. On a totally different note, I want to talk Thou and Dave, the YouTuber. And I remember reading it and being like, that's not realistic. Like, no one could be like that. And then one of my little brothers is like he watches a lot of YouTube videos, and he showed like Mr. Beast and all this stuff. I was like, oh my God, this is so awful. So awful. Did you have to do research to like really nail the voice, or how did you come up with that character?
So I gotta say that there's a lot of YouTubers that I actually really love, and I watch them a lot. So I've been familiar with people on YouTube for a while. And like I say, there's a lot of like great ones. People that I've been watching for a long time, and I find their content like really cool. But you do get aware that sometimes there's some popular YouTubers who might be a bit and I gotta say, he's not based on any one person. So this is actually
get that out of the way.
This isn't like a version of some so and so or something. But I do think that social media, especially YouTube, where the algorithms really control a lot of how many people are coming in and watching your videos. A lot of time in this effort to chase those views, sometimes people maybe lose a bit of themselves or do things that are not necessarily kind, because it is difficult. It's very difficult to make a sustained living, not just as a YouTuber, but a person on social media, where the whims of the viewers, and the whims of the algorithm or whatever, can so quickly take away that popularity, that stability that you thought you had. So Thou and Dave, really what happened is his character started out, he was doing this because he loved it. He was more like really authentically doing what he wanted to do. And I think over time, as he became more popular, Storyteller was really rewarding him for doing a certain type of content. So he was really playing to that. And in the process, he kind of lost a part of why he originally started. Anyway, this is all like backstory to a character that you really don't.
Where's his book?
Yeah, I know. So he has his whole thing, but you end up seeing like very briefly. I referenced him. He had a different name, but like in a younger scene from Nina, like she was listening to a very early version of him, and he did change over time.
Yeah, I think something that's so great about the ending to your book is like that it's whatever. This isn't, I guess it's a spoiler. I'll just say we're just talking the vibe here. It's like hopeful but measured, right? It's not like, everything's solved. Yeah. It's kind of going back to what we were talking about climate change and about, and
Yeah.
and the protection of their home. But that one, Dave, I feel like that's tied up pretty nicely. I think
Oh, that's good.
very satisfying. A couple more, and then I'll ask some audience questions. What is some advice you could give to burgeoning storytellers out there, young and old?
Yeah, and first of all, one of the pieces of advice I like to give is just in general, you should write what makes you happy. And a lot of times when I struggle with writing or have some sort of like writer's block, it's because whatever I'm doing, I'm not happy while I'm doing it. So then I kind of have to think, how do I change this story to make it more fun to write? So yeah, there might be some difficult times in writing. Like, of course, I do sometimes like struggle with editing and rushing deadlines, but overall, it should be a positive experience and something you
Yeah.
enjoy doing. And another thing is that a lot of times there's a pressure to write a certain type of story. And I'm just using as an example, let's say that mermaids are really big one year.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, you should really be writing mermaid stories. If you don't want to write mermaid stories, don't write mermaid stories.
Yeah.
Trends change, and really you should be writing, again, what makes you happy and the story that you think you want to tell. And that really goes for a lot of expectations as storytellers, whether it's themes or the type of book you should be writing. Like for a long time, Native writers weren't really being encouraged to write genre fiction like fantasy and
Yeah.
science fiction. Of course, that's definitely changing, which I think is really cool. But yeah, just do what makes you happy. And there may be a lot of struggles along the way, rejections. I know I had a lot before I reached the point where Latsue was published, like 10 years of that type of, rejections for short stories, for creative writing programs at Princeton. Anyway, and it can sometimes be discouraging, especially because for me, rejections have been very fair, but sometimes you'll get a rejection that's really not fair.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes it's hard to kind of push through that. But if it's something you love, it's writing something you love, then I do encourage you to keep doing it.
I think that's amazing advice because, if publishers or anyone had the answer, they would be making a lot more money and publishing a lot more hit, like number one. And then, you only have your own that's true of an editor as well, right? You have yourself, right? And I think as a writer, it's like, I know what I love. And if it doesn't work, then at least one person loves it. You know what I mean? And at least you went out, doing it your way. I'm so grateful. And I don't know what the word is. Please doesn't cover it, that you didn't write another, like, oh, let me do a Latsue 2 right away, or let me do a, totally different character world, but like kind of the same, murder,
Yeah.
and then you just went in this direction. Like, what a treat, as a reader. Right? All right, so we had a couple audience questions. This is from Cheryl. When did you realize you wanted to write, and especially for young people? What was the inspiration and impetus?
Yeah, and I wanted to write really a long time. I think the first time that I remember saying I want to be a writer as in a career, I had these little Lisa Frigg notebooks, so I must have been first grade. That's actually when I wrote my first novel. But I remember we were at a park and I was like writing my little Lisa Frank journal, and I told my mom I want to be a writer, and she was like, "No," jokingly, because it is a difficult career path. But that my parents have been very supportive. I've got to say, like it was mostly just like, "Oh no, we have an artist," but from there, it's always been a dream of mine. Even when I was working in science, I was writing on the side.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, writing for young people, I think when I was in high school, was kind of when I wanted to be writing the types of books that I was reading. And even now, as an adult, I realize what an impact these books had on me growing up, and as I was developing my sense of what I like to read and what I like to write. So I do think it's very important for people to write young adult books, middle grade books, picture books, all the age ranges.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's like, I was talking with someone and she was saying, like, I think there's such a respect for story, like when you're writing for children and young adults, right? And a respect for that time of your life, right? Which is like, many times I'm like, I'm still like 16 in my head. And then it's like, no, you're significantly older. But it's such a formative time. So I got a question, which for me, which was, Nick, what attracted you to acquiring and editing Darcie's books? That's an easy one. Darcie, you've heard me say this, but like, what you were saying earlier about like when you're really like flowing, right? And you're really enjoying it, like it just kind of like, it comes very naturally. It's the same way, when I first read Alatswe, which is like, I'm just like, this author is really enjoying themselves and has these little asides and little bits of dialogue or little observations that are like, not like, you can do spectacular and you do kind of later or more action packed or whatever, quote unquote. You can do all that, but you just like are such a pleasure to read. Every new line, I'm like, you just sent me some new material today. I'm like, which I can't wait to, it's like every line I'm like, oh, what's she going to say now? Because you're just so surprising. And there's such a sense of joy to reading you, in addition to all those really interesting and deep, themes that you get at. So that was my first impression reading your work and why I wanted to acquire.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And then one more question from Jane, which is, and this is a great question to end on, unless anyone has anything else, which is, Darcie, are you working on something new?
How much am I allowed to say, Nick?
Yeah, something great. Yeah.
Okay, yes. I'll say as general as possible. I am working on something new, a book length thing. Who knows what it'll be? But it's going to, I don't know what to say. It's in that phase of when you're writing where things really haven't been announced yet, but I've been thinking a lot about it and even getting started. And I have to say that I am enjoying just plotting out how this is going to go. And it's going to be another book where you look a lot about friendships and family and what family means. And in this book, I'm actually bringing in a kind of complicated family dynamic. Like, what do you do with family who you love and who loves you, but who lets you down frequently? So it's another thing where there's going to be fantasy element, but also even an element that draws upon my background as an earth scientist and the value of land and homeland and really biodiversity, all sorts of things. And I really can't say more, but could I? The characters are going to be fun.
Yeah, some level of familiarity, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I do think that people who've read my other books, especially Alatswe, might be into this one.
Cool. I think that's a good way to put it. Last question. In your writing, this is a great question. In your writing, are you answering questions that you had as a child or a teenager?
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely addressing things that I enjoyed reading as a teenager and child. Like, I really loved the fantasy genre. That had to be my favorite genre fantasy and horror. I read a lot of Goosebumps, but I also read a lot. I got really into the Dragonlance series and that type of thing. But I really loved.
Did you ever read John Bellairs growing up? Did I ever ask you that?
I don't know. What are the titles of those?
He had like a bunch of series. Like one was like time traveling, and like another was more just. Yeah, it was like the house with a clock in its walls. Or that might be.
I feel like I did. I have this really annoying thing where proper nouns like just slip right through my head. Like I can remember I have almost sometimes a photographic memory of where passages are in books, and
Yeah.
but when it comes to remembering the name of authors, it's so bad. Even my friends, I forget what their last name is, and I'm like, I just call them by their first name. So,
Thomas.
yeah, it's like,
Let's talk offline about John Bellairs, but I'm sorry. I
yeah,
interrupted
sounds good. I might have. I read like just about everything I could find in the library's fantasy section.
Very cool.
Oh gosh, it's getting
All right,
so
well,
dark out here. Sorry about that. I'm using the light from the window primarily, and the sun sets so early.
no, I wish I had that, but it's pitch black out here in New Jersey.
Oh no, East Coast.
It's all right. We'll get it in the morning before you. So, thank you so much, Darcie, and thank you so much, Brandy. So I'll kick it back to you.
Sorry, let me unmute myself first. Since we have another minute or two, I have one question for you.
Yeah.
It was a public figure today. I won't name any names, but he lives in Rome, who made a comment about how, as humans, we should be spending more time raising our own human children as opposed to caring for our pets. And I feel very strongly. I mean, my animals are members of my family, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts about, what it is that humans and animals, that having animals around us really brings into our lives to enrich our lives.
Yeah, and definitely you can do both at the same time.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so my spouse is a veterinarian, so we end up. First of all, we have our dogs, who I love like so much. I wish I could bring them in there, but if I did, like my Valeria would be all over. And maybe I should. Maybe I should next time. But we also get this stream of little animals who oftentimes they needed some sort of like surgery, or for example, we had a one-eyed bunny and a one-eyed hamster. Both of them had like very mild like issues that could be taken care of with surgery, but of course, T was the only one who was able to do that. So we end up taking care of animals for these short periods of time while they're recuperating, kittens too, and then finding homes for them. And it's just, for tens of thousands of years, humans have had almost symbiotic relationships with certain species. I'm thinking in particular dogs, like, so I think on both sides of the family, Irish and Apache, like we have histories of relationships with our dogs. We help each other. But on another hand, we are parts of ecosystem. Oh my God, hello! What's his name or her name?
Annie.
Hi, Annie.
That's definitely the most excited I've ever seen you, Darcie, I think.
Oh,
that
I love
like,
dogs.
Yeah.
My New Year's resolution is to hug more dogs. but yeah, we are parts of ecosystems, and our impact, we make impacts on other living things. They can be positive, or they could be negative, or they can be neutral. But I do feel like we don't always have to think about how a species can benefit us to care about it. We don't even have to, interact with the species. For example, you can care about a species in the middle of some forest or jungle that you personally might never see, but it's still important that they live and play their own roles in their ecosystems.
Yeah.
So yeah, the living world on Earth is so fascinating, and that goes back pre-humans to the times of the dinosaurs, and it's important to respect that. But also, of course, I love dogs so much. I love cats too. Actually, I'm allergic, but recently, we do have foster kittens, and I love just snuggling them and giving them pets. And even when they grow up to the point where I actually get actively allergic to them, I still love hugging them and just letting my eyes suffer for it. So yeah, animals are great, pets are great, and if you can take care of them, that's wonderful.
I think Darcie, with this book, you really like put toads on the map as well too. Like you
Toads
really,
are,
Yes.
yeah. And there's so one thing that I love about toads, but is also like kind of sad is they're so sensitive to the environment they live in. And so oftentimes when there's environmental changes, toads and are some of the first little critters to be affected by that. And this toad was actually based on an actual toad species. Like it's, I made up, like, I think it was called the Dallas toad in the book. There's no such thing in real life, but it was based on Houston toad. And they've had some troubles, but people have been really fighting to help them and to keep them alive. And I don't know, you look at a toad's face and it's just like it's not like they can make much of an expression, but they're just so cute. And I love the way they sound. And maybe it was reading Frog and Toad books as a young person that really got me into that. But yeah, I love toads, and I think people should like be aware that they're wonderful.
Well, I was certainly inspired. And next time I meet a toad, I'm gonna befriend him. Sounds
Yeah.
like toads make great friends.
Little wave. Maybe a wave back at you. Maybe
yeah,
not.
well, we'll tell, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Well, on that happy note, thank you guys both so much for talking to us today. And thank you, viewers, for those great questions. You can still click on the link in the chat to purchase your copy. I forgot to show this earlier. Purchase your own copy of A Snake Falls from the Sky. And then there we do have some signed book plates while supplies last. Oh, I love it. This color is like my new favorite color.
Right, isn't it a great, it's like, they did a great job capturing it too. Like, cause this is exactly what Mia was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
I agree.
All right. Wonderful to see both of you. And we hope to see you again soon. All right, everybody.
Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you so much. I love this panel, and it's always great to talk to you, Nick, and politics